Hallelujah. Hodula Yawa Kitov, Leolam has the. Thank you, Father. Thank you for bringing us together one more time to discuss thy words, thy concepts, thy precepts. Thank you for the Moedim which thou hast shared with us. Thank you for thine Shabbat. Thank you for family. Thank you for joy and shalom. Please give us all you've got today, all you have prepared for us. And thank you for using Eric to bring it to us. Please open our eyes, our ears, our ruach to receive it. And thank you for hearing us, for lending your ear to us. Behashem Yahusha. Oh, great Yahweh. Amen.
Okay, and we begin. You're on.
You know, when I was a kid, my parents would serve us vegetables sometimes, which we just didn't want to eat. And for the sake of not eating those vegetables, we got their attention. You're not getting up from this table until you sit there and eat these vegetables, even if it takes you all night. And we had to sometimes sit there for a couple hours. It's like we got the parents' attention. Last week, we were talking about what would it take to get Yahuwah's attention if he's turned away in some kind of anger. It was like, well, do what he said. So the example of not eating your vegetables so that you get your parents' attention, of course, then they leave the room and come in once in a while and kind of some sort of discuss to see whether you've accomplished the task that you were given. But if you read Isaiah 58, specifically verse 3, it seems that people have got this idea. Where do they get it? I couldn't tell you exactly, but people have this idea that if we don't eat something, we'll get his attention. So as a matter of fact, in Isaiah 58, verse 3, this is the Stone's Tanakh translation. It says, why did we fast and you didn't see? Why did we afflict our souls and you didn't know? So if you look at verse, well, you keep going. Behold, on your fast day, you seek out personal gain and you extort all your debts. Verse 4, because you fast for grievance and strife, to strike with a wicked fist, you do not fast as befits this day to make your voice heard above. And then verse 5, which sets up the whole big deal about Isaiah 58, can such be the fast I choose, a day when man merely afflicts himself? Can it be merely bowing one's head like a bulrush and spreading sackcloth and ashes? Do you call this a fast and a day of favor to Yahuwah? And then in verse 6, surely this is the fast I choose. So he goes on to talk about that. We'll get to that. But this is Isaiah 58. We're going to be talking about the tail end of 57. But it says, do you think that if you fast, you can make your voice heard above? So that's the question. That's what we were talking about last week. What do you have to do to get Yahweh's favor? Now, if you look at the Aaronic benediction in the book of Numbers, it says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe and said, speak to Aharon and his sons. Now, Aharon, Moshe's brother, people call him Aaron. He was the high priest. So his sons were you might say the second in command hierarchy sort of priests. This is how you bless my, when it says B'nai Israel, Bet Nun Yod, the Yod suffix means my Ben, my son, my children of Israel. Say these words. And then at the end of that couple verses of the benediction, blessing, he says, so you will put my name upon B'nai Israel, and I myself will bless them, or will thus indeed bless them. But see, there he says, put my name on my children of Israel. by saying this blessing. And just so you know, you see sometimes Jewish priests hold up their hands like this when they're saying a blessing. It's like, well, it's because they watch Star Trek, and Dr. Spock would do that. Vulcan. Actually, the reason Spock was doing that is because he was Jewish and he knew this was this. It's shaped kind of like the letter Sheen, the modern letter Sheen. So Spock, being Jewish, pulled it into Star Trek, and it became a world famous sort of thing in another context. But the point is, why would he say, you shall? He didn't say, if you put my name. He said, you will put my name, and then I will bless them. So you might want to say, well, kind of, sort of. I mean, how much does it really matter if you put his name? So everybody doesn't put his name. They say Hashem or Adonai or may the Lord. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord. That's not his name. That's not what he said. So we hear or we read what he said based on our language, so it's familiar, and we do what we think he wants us to do, so we get the blessing, so that he'll do what we want him to do. But you see, remember that concept of Gimel Mem is reciprocal mirror action back at you. What we do regarding hearing his words with our heart, with our action, whether we have any affection for his words, attention to his words, and then actually do his words, his turning his attention and favor to us will be reciprocal to that, a mirror image. Resh, Aleph, Hey is to see, or to make an appearance, put something on exhibition. In Klein's dictionary, it says Resh, Aleph, Yod. Now that you can say, well, Yod suffix means my, so my appearance, my exhibition. It's actually the word for mirror. So a mirror is where I see my reflection. Just so you know, there's some words that are in these verses, Resh, Aleph, Yod, and it's not translated mirror. For example, Isaiah 58, verse 3, it says, why do we fast and you don't see? Well, that's spelled Resh, Aleph, Yod, Tav. Well, you don't see, there's no suffix of the letter Kaf, meaning you. So what I'm saying is that if we learn certain rules, such as the Yod suffix means my, Kaf suffix means you, Kaf mem is y'all, Tav mem is them or they all, or Lamed mem is this plural of meaning their, T-H-E-I-R. But those rules don't seem to always apply. Now, I don't personally know all the rules of syntax, of grammar, of the way Hebrew works, as if there was a bunch of fixed nuts and bolts. 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 3, that's going to always equal 5. So, in English, I think, is a much more exact language, meaning there's certain rules of rin, ran, run, running. I done rin, I ran, I am running, I do run, I hope to. It's like, okay, you put in certain vowels in between the R and the N and add a suffix, and I will, I have, you add these other words as a prefix, and you know exactly what's going on, but it never seems to work that way in Hebrew. Now, maybe if you go to a real Hebrew teacher and they'll tell you all these rules, they might say there are fixed, exact parameters of how to construct. So we know exactly what it's saying. However, I've heard it said that nobody really knows how to pronounce the ancient Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew, because people go off the dots and lines underneath the letters, which are called nikud, nicked, or little marks like you nick something, like Nicodemon, Nicodemus. Same word, it just means to be nicked, like something nicked and dented and sold for a discount maybe. Same concept. So the nikud, just so you know, I'm just giving you English concepts that fit around the Hebrew words. Nikud are the little nicks and dents, the marks, the lines and dots that are under the letters, which are the vowel points. But without any vowel points, you have to learn the way it's spoken by somebody, your parents or some teacher. And I've heard people pronounce things completely different. In English, even. And then there was this case where there was a war, Benjamin against the other tribes, and they knew that whoever pronounced the word Sibboleth versus Shibboleth, well, they just learned that's the way you speak that word. And so when they were trying to find who's trying to sneak away and who's really from this tribe, they were at a bridge and they grabbed each person trying to cross and said, pronounce this word. And if they pronounced it that one way, okay, they'd kill him because that was the other guy, the other team. It's kind of like the English word schedule. In America, a schedule. It's like, what time are you going to do this? And then when are you going to do that? SCHEDULE, schedule. But the Brits call it schedule. Makes no sense. Why would they do such a thing? Schedule? It's clearly schedule. It's the same kind of thing as Sibboleth and Shibboleth. Well, that's just one consonant. When you get into all the different vowels, or whether you even pronounce a vowel, nobody really knows. And somebody could say, well, I've determined to be the authority, and this is the way it is. And so they say this is the way that David would have read his poetry, his psalms. And I heard many years ago from somebody who knew that nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's all conjecture. It's all speculation. It's all make of it what you will. So for any of us to look at these words and say, how do you pronounce this? Make it your own. It's up to you. Of course, now if you're trying to communicate with somebody else, you've got to have some sort of agreement. Hence, at the Tower of Babel, they all spoke one language. The world was just one language, but it doesn't tell us what language it was. And then Elohim wanted to scatter the people. In fact, he told them spread out across the face of the earth, and they didn't. They decided to build this tower so they could all congregate, and Nimrod, supposedly, as the story goes, wanted to climb up to the height of the tower and shoot an arrow in the face of Elohim. It was like 500 years after the flood or something. Why were they building the tower? He might have had that ulterior motive. If you read the story, it seems like, well, they were trying to keep this like a lighthouse, a tower, a beacon, this big, so that everybody could stay within sight of the tower, and they'd know they were of the same group. They could congregate around this common theme of this tower, Babel. Tower of Babel wasn't called the Tower of Babel at the time because Babel means confusion. So Elohim saw, hey, look, I told these guys to spread out on the face of the earth, and they're not doing it. Look at what they're doing. When it says that the top was unto the heavens, some people think, well, it was really high. Nobody knows how high it actually got. I think it's the book of Jasher said it was so high that if you picked up some bricks to carry up to the top, if that was your job, it would take you all year, walking all year to get up to the top of this tower. And it's like, how high was this thing? You see pictures, illustrations, and it's much lower. It would maybe take you a couple hours to get to the top. But nobody knows how they fired bricks. They made bricks and built it with that. It wasn't stones. But Elohim looked and he said, gosh, these guys are just a couple hundred years after the flood where he wiped out everybody because of the great evil and wickedness that they were doing. And he said, and this they do. Okay, I'm going to scramble their languages so they can't seem to get along. Because for some reason, when somebody has a different calendar or pronounces the name differently or says schedule instead of schedule or Sibboleth instead of Shibboleth, it's like, you're not one of us. Get out of here. I'm out of here. Something. It's like it's a great disparity. So Yahuwah himself changed the language. And they say he spun out 70 different languages. That's the number. And then since then, those primary 70 languages have all spun out, morphed, permutated. But when he changed the language there at Babel, made it all sound like babbling, confusion, people would, hey, I can recognize what you're saying. So we must have an association. And hey, you over there, I recognize your voice. So we should get together. And those people became the groups, the mishpacha, the family groups, the clan, the tribe, based on recognizing each other's language. That was the common unifying Yod Chet Dalet, Yichad, linking oneness was the language. And then everybody spread out across the face of the earth. That was about 2500 BC. In China, I've heard that they found that the first, you might say, established Chinese, call it a culture, call it a, what does it mean to be Chinese? And the guy who first developed the Chinese written language was about 2500 BC. And there's a video about this, or a couple of them online, that the primary elements of the figures in this almost looks like a Chinese letter. This is the Nun Samik. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. Anyway, the Samik shape almost looks like a Chinese character. But the primary elements of the orthographic, call them the elements, the pieces of the language, because they're drawn little glyphs, were the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel, and Noah's flood. Well, Noah's flood right before the Tower of Babel, those are the three Bible stories in Genesis before he separated everybody. So that's a proof that whoever it was that established the first original Chinese language came from the Tower of Babel. That's where it goes back to. So you find these little, like detective work, doing tracings and trails, and try to figure out, well, what's going on? Well, so the question would be, did Hebrew, if Hebrew was the first language before the Tower of Babel, means it would have been the language that Noah and his three sons and their wives were all speaking. But yeah, but how do you know whether it was Hebrew or not? It never says. And then if that was the language they were speaking at the Tower of Babel before it was babbled, scrambled, did some people group there retain Hebrew and everything else just get changed? Nobody knows. Well, I think it might be the book of Jubilees. Kurt can is more up to speed on that. I believe it says that Abram,
and the Lord God said, open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth with the language which hath been revealed. For it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babel. And I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the tongue of the creation. And he took the books of his fathers, and these were written in Hebrew, and he transcribed them, and he began from henceforth to study them. And I made known to him that which he could not understand, and he studied them during the 6 rainy months.
Living in Ur of the Chaldees, the Chaldeans, which is basically southern Iraq, near where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are, down near Basra somewhere. Anyway, he wasn't speaking Hebrew, but that he had some kind of vision encounter with an angel, and the angel gave him the Hebrew. Hebrew was brought back through Abraham. And the reason Elohim picked Abraham, of all people on the face of the earth, one reason is that it wasn't because you were bigger, stronger, smarter, more talented, knew how to flip a Rubik's Cube faster than anybody else. He said, I see that Abraham will teach his children. So Abraham had a propensity for teaching. Teaching what? Maybe teaching anything. I mean, did Abraham have the Torah such as we knew it? Well, not at first. His father made idols. Pretty good at it, apparently. He had a shop, a carpentry shop, and he'd make these guys and dress them out with silver and gold, and he had a whole room of statues. And I'll tell this story just for fun. It's not in the book of Genesis. It's not in the Holy Bible, such as we know it, but it's in the book of Jasher, Jasher, which is actually, there's no letter J, so it's actually the word Yashar. Well, that would be Yod Shin Resh, Yashar, and it means straight, right, smooth, level. Smooth of skin would be Yashar. So Jacob and Esau were twins. Esau was hairy, and the word Esau has to do with being hairy, and the word of Jacob was smooth skin, but Yaakov doesn't mean smooth. Yashar, Israel, Yashar El, that means smooth. Jacob had his name changed to Yashar El. Just interesting the way the language works. But anyway, so what was happening was Abraham's father had this idol manufacturing shop. He was an idol smith. And Abraham was pondering. He was thinking. He didn't apparently know Yahuwah. Now, this is my take on the story, and somebody could find it slightly different, but this is the way I recall it. He was pondering the culture that he grew up in. He was pondering his father's occupation, and his father had, you might say, government contracts. Maybe Nimrod himself. No, Nimrod would have been a few hundred years before. No, Nimrod would have still been there. People lived hundreds of years back in those days. And I say that because, well, gee, the Tower of Babel, if that was with Nimrod, and that was 500 years before Abraham. But then there's this story that Esau, remember the story of Esau and Jacob, and Esau was on the run. Why? Well, anyway, he comes to Jacob and says, man, I'm starving, hungry. I'm famished. Will you give me something to eat? And Jacob assesses the situation and says, sell me your birthright and I'll give you some of this stew, this red stew that I've been making. Esau was hairy and red, and so there was something about the redness. But anyway, Esau somehow said, well, what good is it if I die, if I retain my birthright? I'm just about dead. And I always thought, well, that meant he was exhausted, so tired. It's like, we don't know the story. And so anyway, he says, yes, fine, right? Just give me something to eat. So they swapped. Jacob got his birthright and he gave him the stew, and then he got perked up, energized, and he kept running. And it's like, what was that all about? Well, in the book of Yashar, I believe it says Esau killed Nimrod, and Nimrod's friends were chasing him, and they were just about upon him. Esau was losing strength, and we ran into Jacob. He said, these guys on my tail are going to catch me for sure unless you give me something to boost my energy so I could keep running. It was dire straits. It was a tough situation. And so Jacob, weaselly kind of taking advantage of his brother's plight. Oh, come on, Jacob, why would you do that? The insipid, insidious little conniving scheming. That's where Jacob's reputation comes from, that kind of thing. Figuring and calculating and, well, so anyway, Abraham, which was Jacob and Esau's grandpa, he would have still known Nimrod. So Nimrod might have been around. I don't know. I don't know the timing, but I'm just saying Nimrod's or Abraham's father would have been maybe making these idols for that culture, those people. And then Abraham's looking, and there's in this room, let's just say there was a couple dozen statues, but one of them was the chief of the gods, what some people would call Zeus, maybe the Romans, or Jupiter, I think, was the name of the Roman god, and Zeus was the Greek father of the gods. We could talk about where those names come from, but that's another matter. Related to Paleo-Hebrew, the word Zeus is specifically a permutation of the pronunciation of Yod He Vav He, Zeus. Anyway, so Abraham's checking this, and he's thinking, he's looking, and his heart's in turmoil, and his mind is like, what's the reality? And he picks up an axe and he chops up all those statues, probably worth millions of dollars. And then he hangs the statue around the neck of the one chief god. And then he sneaks out, does this in the middle of the night. This story is in the book of Yashar. It's not in the book of Genesis, but it's the same period of time. And in the morning, people come up and they come into the room and the whole place is totally vandalized and smashed up. And somebody suspects Abraham. It's like, that kid, Abraham. It's like, why would they think him? Well, he's this troubled. And so they grab him and they drag him in there. And did you do this? And he says, what do you look at me for? That obviously that guy did it. The one with the axe around his neck. He chopped up all those other guys. They must have had an argument in the middle of the night. Shut up. He can't swing an axe. You did. So, whoa, really? Here this idol who's the chief of your gods can't even swing an axe? So why are you worshiping him? You, my father, you, my family and friends, if that's not the truth, you think that's nothing but a statue of wood and metal, why are you worshiping it? It was just this trick. Anyway, Abraham was fully disfavored. Abraham was sent out running. So the question is, we can find ourselves brought up in a culture that believes certain things, believes they're absolutely true. And then as we start pondering and we start bumping into the Torah, well, if we read their translations, I've found that their translations are kind of tweaked, kind of bent to sustain the party line. Yeah, but what's it really say? Well, look at it in the original Greek. Well, the Greek wasn't original. Well, maybe the New Testament was original, but not everybody thinks it was. Some people say the original was in Aramaic, or some of the New Testament was original in Hebrew. Maybe some of it originally Greek, but the point is, what's it really say? And then what's it really mean? And even though if you can read it and pronounce it the official way that people want us to pronounce it, that's not necessarily where it's at. The question is, what's the communication? What is Elohim trying to say to us? So here's the big question. When I was going to this Torah congregation a few years ago, they had a bulletin every week, like churches have, and on the back of the bulletin was quoted a verse from Isaiah 58, specifically verse 13. It says here, reading from the Stone Tanakh, it says, if you restrain your foot because it is the Sabbath, refrain from accomplishing your own needs on my holy day. If you proclaim the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of Yahweh honored, and you honor it by not engaging in your own affairs, not seeking your own needs, not discussing the forbidden, whatever that is, then you will delight in Yahuwah, and I will mount you astride the heights of the world. I will provide you the heritage of your forefather Yaakov, for the mouth of Yahuwah has spoken. Well, that's a sworn promise. If you do these, what is it, 3 things? Well, there's actually maybe 5 things. If you refrain your foot from the Sabbath, refrain from accomplishing your own needs, refrain your foot because it's the Sabbath. Well, wait a minute. We were talking about what do you have to do to get his attention for his favor? Do you pronounce the blessing? Do you fast? Why do we fast and you don't see? And here he's saying, the way you regard the Sabbath, if you will do this list, and here's a little checklist, check these off. You do this checklist. Now, wait a minute, do we have to get his attention to say, oh, hey, there's somebody doing it here, I'll toss them some rewards, or is it an automatic mechanism? There's a couple weeks ago, forget the exact verse, but we were saying how it read like he built in an automatic mechanism regarding the Sabbath day, that the whole universe is built with the Sabbath day a critical factor, meaning if you go, and I talked about this, if you go back to Genesis 1, there's 6 days that he worked and he accomplished. At the beginning of Genesis chapter 2, He says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed and all their array. And the word array is Aleph-Beit Aleph, Zavah, which means hosts or legions. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Does that mean every planet and its moons? Or is that the array around the planet? Or does he mean the galaxy and its space alien inhabitants? Is that the Zavah, Zavot? We don't know. It just means it's array. It means not only are the principal things, but all the accoutrements, all the stuff that becomes what we would refer to as nature, the moons, the math, the chemistry, the flora and fauna, the biology, the thinking processes, everything. So when he says he's Yahweh's Zavot, it's not just angel armies, angels and demons, humans and animals and fish and birds and fungi and microorganisms. There's a complexity that we can only guess at, that he's the responsible creator, owner, possessor of the heavens and the earth. That's his name. Yahweh's Zavot is not just a word. It means Yahuwah. Well, that's Yod He Vav He. Well, that's his name. It means he will cause to exist. If I appropriate the Yod, meaning he will, that's future tense, or he does, or he has, or which is it? He's the responsible party. The hand, the strong hand is the Yod of He Vav He. And any verb that's He Vav He, whether it's Hey Yod He or Yod He Yod or Yod He Vav, or any combinations of the He's and Vavs and Yods, and even if Alephs and Tavs are thrown in, is the verb to exist. Just so you know, you read, you see the scripture and you see that word and it's like, okay, it means to exist. So the word He Vav Aleph is translated he, it, or the same. In other words, it exists. I mean, this is the existence of that. This equals this. So it's not the verb to exist. It's translated he, it, or the same one, the same thing. Okay, so Yod He Vav He is he is the one who causes to exist, Zavah, Zavot. He causes everything to exist. Therefore, everything, he's the grand master, creator, owner, possessor. The word Adonai, meaning Lord, is the Aleph, Dalet, Vav, Nun, Yod. Aleph prefix, Yod means my, I will, my. What's Dalet, Vav, Nun? Don. Well, in Spanish, like Don is a father, is a, like Don Juan. When I say in English, it's like, oh, this guy's the lord of the manor. This guy's the big shot. This guy's the governor or the prince or the CEO of a company. But Dalet Nun, Dan, like the tribe of Dan, literally means to decide, like a referee or an umpire. That guy calls whether, if the ball bounces on the line, whether it's in or out, whether it's a fair play or not. You know, baseball, if it's a close thing, man, that umpire, that referee has to make the call. He's the responsible party. So to call him Adonai is not just Lord, it's a nice sounding name. It means I'm going to make my determines. I will Adonai, my decision based on his decision. Whatever he says, that's what I'm doing. If I Zadi Vav, if I man his crew, I'm going to follow his determinations. If he says sit down on Shabbat, I'm going to sit down on Shabbat. If he says don't eat pork, I'm not going to eat pork. If he says we in my kingdom of heaven celebrate the Moedim, then I'm going to celebrate the Moedim. Yeah, but no yeah buts. I'm going to do as he determined, because he's Adonai. He's my determinator. That kind of clears up a lot of trouble. If I say I'm going to rethink all his commands and instructions, I'm going to determine if they make sense, if they're appropriate for our time and culture. I mean, I've heard, when I was a kid, I heard it said, well, why don't the Jews eat pork? Well, there's some old-fangled instruction in the Torah because they didn't know how to cook things properly. They didn't know how to cook, or they didn't have time to cook. They didn't have camp stoves with propane burners, or they didn't have, what do you mean they don't know how to cook? Oh yes, but we're so smart. We know how to cook pork properly, and so we can eat bacon and we can have Italian sausage. Yeah, but he said not to. Those guys. Torah nailed to the cross. What? Wait, Yeshua only did what he sees his father doing and only says what he hears his father saying. And if his father's heart, because of the way he knows he built the place, telling his people, don't eat pork, Yeshua wouldn't have eaten pork, nor would he have had his Holy Spirit tell his apostles and disciples to eat pork, nor would he have given Peter a vision to get up and eat pork. That's not what it meant. Oh, that's the way it sounded. What? Why would he set up such a problem? He knows, because he knows the future, he knows darn well what the church is going to say for 2,000 years about eating pork. Because of Peter's vision that he gave him 3 times. Hey, Peter, rise and eat. Get up and kill that pig and eat it. It's right there on a sheet with the giraffe and the orangutan and the kangaroo and all these other animals on the sheet. And you're supposed to get up and kill that pig and eat it. No way, I'm not going to do that. Don't call unclean what I call clean. Well, you see, the voice of Yahweh never called that pig or any of those other particular unclean animals clean. He was making a statement of a concept, but yet people pick it up and run with it and mislead it and then misread it and then mislead their followers because of it. So when you read here, let's look at the beginning of Isaiah 58. I'll just read it in the English for now. It says, cry out vociferously. Make a big stink about this. Do not restrain yourself. Yeah, but I might be unpalatable. They might unfriend me. Somebody might be disturbed. Do not refrain yourself. Yeah, well, don't even think not to make an issue out of these matters. That's what he's saying by do not restrain yourself. Don't feel bad for them. Don't stop your voice. Well, you better have the truth and they better not have the truth. If you're going to have that kind of an attitude, that kind of a presentation, raise your voice like a shofar. Well, we got this public forum of this Skype call. That's about as close as I can see. Proclaim to my people their willful sins, to the house of Jacob their transgressions. See, he's not saying go out there and tell all the other people where they're blown, where they're doing stuff wrong. Don't go out there to all the other nations, all the other cultures, all the other religions, all the other families, stick your nose in their business and say, you guys shouldn't be doing it like that. He says, go to my people. Go to the house of Yaakov. Go to the people who claim their identity because they know me. They speak my language. They've already aligned their heart with my protocols, my festivals, my Sabbath day, my commandments. Go to those people. And when it says they're willful sins, there's a difference between a willful sin and a sin by accident. As a matter of fact, if you look back in Leviticus, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, every one of the, you might say, call it the protocols for offering a sacrifice was for a sin that you did by mistake, not a willful sin. A willful sin is to say, well, I know he said don't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. I've heard that. Yahweh always forgives his people when they ask him, we're going to do this and ask for forgiveness. That's a willful sin. There was no sacrifice for that. It was a sin that you didn't know you committed, and all of a sudden you realize you did something wrong, or somebody was offended, or somebody's property was damaged, and so you took your animal and you brought it to the priest and say, man, I gotta beg for absolution here. I gotta get some amnesty for my crime that I didn't even know I committed. It was totally by accident. So here the way this word is translated, we'd have to look that up. But anyway, proclaim to my people their willful sins, to the house of Yaakov their transgressions. What's a transgression? Is it different than a sin, than a willful sin? The word is spelled het tet aleph, which is the word for sin. Transgression. You're crossing over. You know, there's the word progress. Well, in English, that's P-R-O-gress. And this is trans, like trans is a big issue these days. Transgress, crossing. Well, Hebrew means to cross over. So crossing over itself isn't a bad concept. The question is, what are you crossing over to? Well, he goes on to explain in the next verse, Isaiah 58:2. They seek me, or here in this translation, as in brackets, they pretend to seek me every day. The word that's used there is drosh, which is actually Bible study. They do Bible study every day and desire, that's the word chafatzi, my desire, my pleasure, to know my ways, like a nation that acts righteously and has not forsaken the mishpat, the justice of its Elohim. They inquire of me about the laws of justice. Okay, so on the surface, as far as anybody knows, the house of Jacob, remember there's 12 tribes in the house of Jacob. Northern kingdom had 10, the southern kingdom had 2. The Levites were floating around without an inheritance, but the tribe of Joseph split into 2 and had Ephraim and Manasseh. So if you could say, well, there's actually 12 tribes, there's actually 13 with Ephraim and Manasseh. But anyway, that whole group that gets their name, their Shem, their place, their reputation as being Yahuwah's people. And because the family, as we heard back in the Tower of Babel, were separated by language, there's something about the Hebrew language which is all about what makes this a family. I've said before that I heard a certain chief rabbi in London was giving a talk. Somebody sent it to me a few years ago. And what he was saying, his lecture, was how it's the Hebrew language which unifies Jews around the entire earth. It's not necessarily the type of hat they wear or the way they pronounce or the custom of how they prepare certain food or what they do on the Sabbath day. It's the language which unifies. That's the word then, Yod Chet Dalet. The 12 tribes were Yechad, unified. Aleph Chet Dalet is a little bit, maybe quite a bit more, one. Yeshua and Yahuwah, his father's Shem, they're Echad. And he prayed that we would be Echad with them. Aleph Het Dalet. But the unity of the tribes was Yod Het Dalet, just to make a distinction. The prefix letter Aleph compared to Yod, and then the letters Het Dalet, Chid. Something hid. It's like our letters H-I-D, hidden, like a riddle, but Het Dalet means sharp, uni, mono, one. Well, the number 1 is written as a straight line. The prefix letter I in English is the straight, thin line, the thinnest little line you can draw. So the oneness it doesn't have a bunch of other, it's this singular sharp pointed, well, apex, sharp pointed, the tip of a thin knife, picture of a blade of grass. Well, that sure looks like the crescent moon of the first day, maybe even the second day, but that's a Het Dalet. So when you start to look at the word for new moon, it's Rosh Chodesh. Chodesh is Het Dalet Shin. Well, Het Dalet is that thin, sharp point. What's Dalet Shin? Grass, to be trampled on, but it's grass, like a thin blade of grass. So I could look at just the word Chodesh and say, boy, that sure looks like the sliver of the moon. Maybe I should consider Rosh Chodesh to be the sliver of the moon. That's going to set up my calendar. So when does a day start, a month, a year, the Moedim cycles? It all has to do with that word Chodesh. So when he says Rosh Chodesh, well, that's the beginning of the month. That's the sliver of the moon, because Het Dalet means sharp, thin point, and Dalet Shin is a blade of grass that looks like a sharp, thin point. Then boy, so there I go. So, no, wait a minute. What's the word Rosh mean? Well, head. Well, a head is a big round thing. A big round thing, head. Well, that's the full moon. Well, which is the word for month? The word for month isn't on there. Big, full, round, thin, sharp. Which one of the two is it? How do I determine the calendar? Well, if I look in the dictionary for Rosh, it means beginning, foundation, basis. Well, that's obviously the thin. That's when that's when it starts. Well, but it also means pinnacle, summit. Well, the pinnacle of a sharp, thin point is this is the little sharp point, the pinnacle of a knife edge. Yeah, but if the pinnacle of the month is the full moon, then the word Chadesh isn't thin, sharp. It's the word translated month, but what it means is renewed. But every month the moon is renewable. Yeah, but where does it start? With the darkness, the thin sliver, or the full? See, it doesn't tell you. So what you do is you go by whatever they said from generations ago, and it's like, but it all got scrambled. So is the Rosh of the Kadesh, is that the full moon? Rosh is the first. Rashon is first. First, best, primordial. From the ancient times. Well, when Yahweh first built the universe, he said, man, that's good. That's Tov. Everything's good in its fullness. That's Rashon. But wouldn't he make the full moon in its fullness to light up the night in its head of fullness? So the Rosh of the Chadesh is the full moon and not the sliver. So do we all have the calendar 2 weeks out of sync? Dang. So that's why, I have got other friends who believe that same way. And so it's like, well, wait a minute. Was it a week and a half ago that it was the beginning of the month, or is it another couple weeks from now that it's? See, we don't know. I don't know. Maybe you know. We have to behave as if we know, because we have to go with something. So the Moedim season is upon us for these autumn Moedim. On the calendar that we were looking at, we kept Yom Kippur yesterday. Now the Jews will, from what I understand, the rabbis will make sure that especially Yom Kippur, the day of fasting, does not land on a Shabbat, because a Shabbat's supposed to be a joyful time, and the word ayin nun hey means humble, afflicted, oppressed, and not joyful. And so if Isaiah 58 is about the Shabbat, or if it's about Yom Kippur, we'll talk about that in a moment, you don't want to afflict yourself in the day you're supposed to be rejoicing, which is the Shabbat. So they'll adjust the calendar and kick Yom Kippur off. So if you were keeping that particular calendar, then today would be Yom Kippur, not yesterday. But I believe the Jews' calendar established by the rabbis, called the Hillel calendar, is kicked off a month from now. So it's not now, but Joseph Dumond of Sighted Moon and a bunch of people are regarding yesterday or today as Yom Kippur. Just so you know. And some people 2 weeks from now or a month from now. But the question is, how do we know what's going on? You got to do something, and you can say, look, there's too much contention. I'm just not going to deal with it. And it's like, but Yahweh said, I believe it's in, not here in Isaiah 58, but I believe it's back in Leviticus 23. He said, anybody who doesn't afflict themselves on Yom Kippur will be cut off from being my people. Well, that's the whole Christian church. Does that mean they're all going to burn in hell because they don't regard Yom Kippur? Yeah, but the Jews who do regard Yom Kippur don't believe in Jesus, so they're going to burn in hell? And it's like, well, that's the big dilemma that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, is that depending on where I draw the line of what's acceptable behavior based on acceptable belief or not acceptable, who does Yahuwah have as a people? If he says, if you don't humble yourself on Yom Kippur, you're not my people, and you get cut off and kicked out. There goes the entire Christian church. But if you have to accept Jesus in your heart, there goes the entire Jewish world for the last few thousand, at least the last 2,000 years. And if they had gone astray, worshiping Elohim Achrim, then that, since the days of Solomon, then that means ever since about 1000 BC, Yahuwah's got nobody being his people. But yet he says here in Isaiah, they seek me every day. They have Bible study. They desire to know my ways from their heart to say, yes, we want to know you. There was a song I remember singing in church. We want to know you more dearly, see you more clearly, love you more nearly, or something. Anyway, rhyming. It was a wonderful, heartfelt song, worship song. And what if I want to know you, Lord, or something? I think it was what it was. And what if he answered that? If you sing that worship song as a prayer, I just want to know you, Lord, to see you more clearly, love you more dearly. You know, the only way he can answer that is to let you comprehend that there's a Sabbath day in his Moedim. As I read the Torah, he calls us to walk in the ways of righteousness, which is truth and kindness, justice. Yeah, but so does the Christian church. But what does it mean to know him? He said to Abraham, I see he'll teach his children. So he picked Abraham and he rattled his consciousness and plugged in knowing about Yahuwah. And the only way that he could do that would be to conflict Abraham's understanding of his culture and of his parents' religion by somehow showing him from the Hebrew what's built into the language, which is the consciousness of Yahuwah, Zavot, the Elohim of Israel. Even though there was no phrase Israel, because that was plugged into Jacob, his grandson, years later. But see, to see the Moedim in the Mishkan pattern, in the Aleph-Beit, when Abraham was restored the Aleph-Beit, it's in there. When all the other languages change the letters, change the design of the letters, the meaning of the letters, the vocalization of the letters, they lose it. But seeing the Mishkan pattern of the Moedim plugged into the Hebrew Aleph-Beit locks in, because the Moedim, Ed, Ayin Dalet, is witness and testimony of what? Of his identity and of the character, the culture of his kingdom. The kingdom of heaven focuses its culture in the spring and the fall festivals, and Shavuot's thrown in there a little bit after the spring. You know, you look at the American culture, Christmas and New Year's. Well, that's culture. It has nothing to do with Americanism, but that's culture. It's commercial and party. But then you got the big ones is Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day. Those are American culture. Well, what do they say about America? Well, Veterans Day and Memorial Day talk about the soldiers, and 4th of July, hey, that's our, it's like, wait a minute. You start looking at the history and you see it's all bogus nonsense. But every month there's something else. The Irish, St. Patrick's Day, the Mother's Day, Father's Day, the whatever, just to keep the commercial machine rolling. That's American, the American thing. What is it that keeps Yahuwah's kingdom consciousness active, percolating, happening? It's his Moedim. You forget his Moedim, and poof, the distinctiveness of his kingdom vaporizes. Oh no, you still have Bible study, and you still have be good, don't be bad. You still have, oh, dear Lord, please bless us. We'll pray to you and ask you to do things for us. Yeah, but if you don't have your ear listening to his Torah, he can't hear your prayers. Isn't that what the proverb said? Whoever turns away his ear from listening to the Torah, even so, I can't listen to his prayers. His prayers are an abomination. And the word abomination is like a tumor, which is like thick and doesn't allow flow, and it causes non-functioning. So all those great Bible studies and prayer meetings don't accomplish what he says, verse 2 of Isaiah 58, they seek me every day. Bible studies written on their computers and wall hangings, desire to know my ways. Oh, yes, we want to be your people and know who you are and walk in your ways. We really want to. Like a nation that acts righteously and has not forsaken the justice of its Elohim, the justice, the mishpat. What is mishpat? Balanced scales so that whatever you do comes back upon you. If you don't listen to the Torah, he can't hear your prayers. Learn his ways and walk in his ways, then he will listen to you and pour out his favor. I mean, okay, but we're not going to listen to him. We're going to believe that everything he ever said was nailed to the cross. So we're not going to do his Torah. And then I've heard people say, if I keep the Sabbath day, I'm trying to be righteous. And he said, we're not righteous. We have to have imputed righteousness because of Christ's death. Therefore, I'm not going to keep the Sabbath day because I don't want to try to exercise my own righteousness. But he said to keep the... See, it's the convoluted thinking. So balanced scales of justice is not necessarily just legalese. It's what's what. What is it? What is reality? The word mishpat is, what did he make and what is it? What did he say to us? What are we supposed to do? That's a balanced scales of mishpat. As if they desire the nearness of Elohim, asking, why did we fast and you didn't see? Why did we afflict our souls and you didn't know? Well, the only way for them to determine that is to say, listen, we've invented or inherited a bunch of religious protocols, liturgies, songs to sing, prayer. Liturgy is like literature, written out prayers. In Jerusalem, I was there a few years ago, and I was in this one bookstore, and there's this little book of prayers. And I thought, well, this would be interesting. And I read the intro, and just this little thing, and it says, some really smart rabbis, long time ago, or even some of the present ones, have calculated the perfect way to say a prayer, a certain request for all these different situations. The bereavement of a loved one, the asking for favor going on a journey, the proclamation of praise at a time of thankfulness, and they've written out all these prayers. And the nice thing about this little prayer book is they go, wow, they've got all the best words in all the right places. Read this prayer and I couldn't have said it better myself. I'll just read that prayer and go, yeah, hey, you know, like that. He's got to respond to that. He's got to know he loves those words. Those rabbis, and I've seen other Christian books, I'm not poking on the rabbis, three minutes, that we as humans, it's like, if we're going to capture his attention, we got to take the words that we know and put them together in just the right way. And if we stumble and get the wrong word, it's just not going to work as good. But you know, my brother-in-law is a fisherman, ties a certain fly. Time of day, time of year, where's the fish? What are the... Man, if you know all the details and tie this thing, you just toss that in, and boom, that fish will take it. So you were saying last week, if you're going to fish for Yahweh's attention, just the right words, just the right liturgy, just the right singing, just the right incense in the room, just the right. If you close your eyes, are they open a little bit? Are you peeking? Remember when we were kids, like, close your eyes when you pray. Okay, then you get a little older and you kind of open your eye and you look around. Hey, your eyes open too. What are you doing? It's like, are you allowed to pray with your eyes open? Is he going to hear your prayers if your eyes are open? Is it like going to the post office and, oops, I forgot to put the stamp on the envelope. If I open my eyes, it nullifies the... Is it okay? Can I add to the prayer? Could some angel please take my prayer and make sure it gets to you because I opened my eye? Dude, how does this stuff work? Dang, I wish he'd just give us a formula that we could all agree on. We're going to take a break.